Did you know that the Prohibition paved way for cocktail culture in the US to bloom? Between the years of 1920 and 1933, the selling and manufacturing of alcohol in the US was outlawed, so people began to get creative. Alcohol made in secret tended to taste so terrible that people began to mix it with everything and anything to make it more enjoyable. This period became known as the Prohibition era. In today's video, we will highlight some of the causes for the movement along with key events during the era. We will talk about the effects and how it would ultimately fail. Alcohol prohibitions were nothing new among the states. Massachusetts had set a precedent for such legislation in 1838 by prohibiting the sales of spirits unless they were in 15-gallon quantities or more. Though it was repealed 2 years later, Maine followed a similar path, being the first state to have a full prohibition in 1846. By the time the Civil War began, many states had adopted some type of legislation against alcohol as well. By the 1900s, temperance movements began to pick up momentum. Women played a big role in these movements as alcohol was seen as destructive to families and marriages. A wave of religious revivalism that swept the country 100 years prior also helped these movements, as saloon culture was seen as corrupt and unholy. Thus, the Anti-Saloon League came more alive after their establishment in 1893. The movements claimed that alcohol made people violent, thus increasing the crime rate in towns and cities. With support being at an all-time high, the US entered World War I, and President Wilson called for a wartime ban in order to save grain to produce food in 1917. Congress then submitted the 18th Amendment, which banned the making, selling, and distribution of intoxicating liquors that very same year, though it doesn't really say anything about the consumption of it, so people still drank whatever they had left, even by January 1919, when the amendment had been ratified and the national ban was imposed the following year. With people being people, the federal and state governments had a pretty hard time enforcing the prohibition. The IRS was initially given the assignment of enforcing the ban for places of business, assumingly. The Department of Justice ended up taking over shortly after. Though initially the ban did reduce alcohol-related arrests, a new wave of crime was on the rise. Again, people who would want to drink will drink. No other person knew this best than the Chicago gangster Al Capone. Bootlegging, moonshine, and speakeasies, which were places selling alcohol, were the bloom of the Prohibition. Al Capone reportedly made $60 million a year from these types of operations. These operations fueled a rise in gang violence in the cities, with everybody wanting to get a piece of the profits. The most notable gang event in relation to the Prohibition is the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, in which several men, believed to be associated with Al Capone, dressed as police officers, shot and killed a group of enemy gangsters. Fair to say that at moments, the appeal to reduce crime by the Prohibition began to backfire. With the country now in the Great Depression, the creation of jobs was on everyone's mind, and the liquor industry had a big appeal to do just that. Movements for liberty and the repeal of the Prohibition began to gain momentum. Pins with the Statue of Liberty with the words "No beer, no work" alongside of it were some of the symbols of a country wanting its freedoms back. By 1932, FDR had adopted ending the Prohibition to his election campaign. With FDR's win over Herbert Hoover, the 21st Amendment was proposed to repeal the 18th Amendment. On December 1933, Utah will become the 36th and final necessary vote for the Constitution to be ratified. Though some states kept their state ban, all states would abandon it by 1966. Whether you enjoy a cold one on the weekday or get your parties on the weekend, alcohol is enjoyed all over the states and around the world. It's fair to say that, as all things, it has its pros and cons. What do you think about such movement arising again? Do you think we'll ever have a prohibition in the states again? Let me know what you think in the comments below.